Good morning. Welcome, everybody. We are back in Senate Economic Development, Housing and General Affairs. It's the 19th of March. And we will have our Proposition 3 to our constitutional amendment that we passed last year out of both chambers. And so, as required by law for it to go on to the ballot in November 26th, we need to pass it again by a majority vote in both chambers. We were unanimous in the past, and I'm hoping that we will be so again. But I just want us to read this, I consider important amendment to our Constitution. I'd just like to read it so that we're all anchored in it for the moment. This proposal would amend the Constitution of the state of Vermont to provide that the citizens of the state have a right to collectively bargain, that employees have a right to organize or join a labor organization for the purpose of collectively bargaining with their employer through an exclusive representative of their choosing for the purpose of negotiating wages, hours, and working conditions, and to protect their economic welfare and safety in the workplace. Therefore, no law shall be adopted that interferes with, negates, or diminishes the right of employees to collectively bargain with respect to wages, hours, and other terms and conditions of employment and workplace safety, or that prohibits the application or execution of an agreement between an employer and a labor organization representing the employer's employees that requires membership in the labor organization as a condition of employment. And this will be this is on notice for tomorrow for a vote on the floor of the Senate. And so we've had time to think about it. We've discussed it in committee. And I think if there are any additional questions, happy to chat about it. But at this point, I think I'd love to move to a straw poll if that is okay with everybody. Okay. So, straw poll, all those in favor? Aye. Great. Opposed? No. Great. Thank you very much. Then we can carry that on the floor of the House tomorrow. I am not sure. You carried the weight on this. You're doing the labor bills. I don't know how we want to do it on the floor, but let's chat about that.
This bill?
This proposal.
Okay.
Because it will come up, and we had framed it last year in a floor discussion, and I'm happy to do that. And let's just chat about how we want to do that.
Okay. I would like to ask, I was particularly moved by Senator Brock's story in voting for this last biennium.
Yes,
story was that?
Your grandfather. I think it was your grandfather.
Oh. No big deal.
Right? Wasn't he the one? Yeah.
And I wondered, we sometimes our press conferences are more partisan than others, but we have Cedar Creek book tomorrow for this. And I have valued that this has been bipartisan, that, labor issues have at this level haven't become one party or the other. Would you speak at the press conference? Sorry, I actually didn't mean to ask this live so that there was more. You can think about it.
Yeah, I can say something. Certainly that same story is one, but there's obviously more to it than that. Sure, I think most of us on our side perhaps do have some concerns about labor issues, and those are the things we're talking about. But this bill, this overarching bill that provides for a right for Vermonters, I think it's important.
Yeah, thank you. Yeah, you're here. Thank you all.
And I'll just say, I think we have a lot of good examples from this past year of when we did not go down the road of creating more collective bargaining because we did not think, that was necessarily the right solution to help migrant workers, et cetera. I mean, that was the recommendation that came out of our group, is that this would not be the path that would make a difference. So I think we have examples in all directions of how unions can be really helpful, and when they
we certainly also have a body of laws that provide rights have responsibilities for both sides in this issue, and that's one of the things I think that we look to in this amendment would not effectively change that. Now, one of the biggest uncertainties, of course, is for agriculture, which we talked about, and that is the immigrant labor with non-legal labor, which is still in litigation without a final Supreme Court decision. And I think that is going to be concerning.
Yeah,
I don't think that this bill effectively changes anything.
right.
So either.
The legislature, I mean, the courts might ask us to weigh in once again. And if it comes up on the floor, I'd probably just say to folks, we had a tripartisan task force that was essentially tasked with creating those structures for union organizing. And we instead said that's probably not the best way to support that category of worker. So,
Yeah, but that would not obviously be prohibited though, by any means under this law. But there are just some regulatory uncertainties. I don't know that unless asked, if we want to get into that detail because
No.
there are uncertainties that no one can answer.
I bring it up now, so in case people get asked between now and the floor, that I feel pretty comfortable.
That's because we have some new members. We have quite a few new members.
I mean, the real thing that our goal in all of this is to organize members of the legislature so we target the working.
We're
Bargaining with.
those of us who went through that last year are right with you. So
That's pretty momentous.
this is momentous, exciting. So thank you very much. And we go to the floor. And what time is the press conference tomorrow? Well, we're gonna probably be on the floor.
Oh,
Remember, we're 11 to
I thought we were 10 a.m. tomorrow.
we're 10. Oh, you're right. We're 10 with
You might actually give us a break, but
right. We have
check.
judicial retention. So we are on the floor, the Senate floor at 10. We have judicial retention at 10:30. And we may be done by 12. That's right.
Yeah.
Maybe safe bet.
Yeah. Otherwise, but we'll count on 12 and we'll try to be in touch with both.
So we have, you've touched on the ag minimum wage discussion too, which we will have as this session continues, but not for an amendment for right now. What we have for consideration for the next, I'd just love to have committee discussion on where we are. We have 3 issues that are in front of us for consideration for an amendment on our labor bill. One is the certified payroll. One is the right to organize for the assistant attorney generals. And the other is the other is decertification. Right. Thank you. The 50+1. And so I would just love to hear where people are on those. We had strong tests. We've had very good testimony. And we got some good follow-up testimony on the certified payroll. The certified payroll has been legal federally for, I think, is it 91 years. I mean, this is not like for doing anything new or cutting edge. But so let's chat first about the assistant AGs and where people are with that. Because we can have we have some time on Friday. We could do some further conversation about that on Friday. And I'd need to know who you'd want to hear from. I will just preface Friday may also be with the BAA having transformed itself in large measure. We will see what that looks like today, probably. There are a number of asks that may come in. Mostly I've asked just for policy changes. The money asks from the BAA that are in discussion in the House because they have the budget and they're doing the money piece. But we've already had at least one request to have an amendment on our housing bill from the VHFA, and they're going to be discussing that tomorrow morning when Maura comes in.
For BA.
Yeah, no, for inclusion in our housing bill from the BAA, an additional piece that was in the BAA that was language that they needed, saw a policy, a modest policy change that they want to include. So we're going to hear about that tomorrow. And there may be other pieces that come to us as the BAA shifts gears. So I just wanted to give you a heads up on that. We
But
all,
it's probably worth just saying that, currently, based on the letter from the pro tem and the speaker last night, that I imagine is public to all at this point, there was a lot of concessions on, housing dollars in the BAA that will instead be discussed for the budget.
heartbreaking for us. For the housing committee, heartbreaking because those will then now have to be considered in light of the big bill of the budget, and those were additional dollars that we were really hoping to fund into housing ASAP. So that is, I think, a big challenge for us. We may, but encouragingly, I think we're hopefully the negotiations continue and we will come to some compromise that helps us move forward with the VAA meeting. We're also getting in finance, Tom Chittenden can speak to this, but we're getting some pushback from the auditor, not a surprise, on our chip proposal. As we know, he's not a huge fan of chips in whatever guise they're in. So we're working on that as well. And so that's sort of the update. If you want to have anything you want to add, we've looped in all our appropriate people.
Send this to you, Senator Brock. I think I heard Senator Weeks, but yeah, so there's an email from the auditor who wants to speak tomorrow to Senate Finance, and also other advocates who are lined up for testimony as well. So I expect a lot of discussion about the CHIP program that we passed out of committee. I think I see some testimony today with VLCT. So I wouldn't be surprised if the committee wants to revise, alter, change, or if they might hopefully pass it along to get it to the House for them to further refine it as well. But I expect discussion in finance. I don't know if you want to say anything, what you expect at Senate Finance, sir.
I don't know. Frankly, I don't know. I know the auditors' objections are probably are the same objections that we've heard, and they certainly ought to be considered. At the same time, we have considered other issues that overrode many of those objections.
Right. I mean, yeah,
No, I'm just wondering if it's worthwhile having him, have the auditor come in here and speak to us. I know it sounds like he's going into finance.
He'll be in finance, I believe, it today or tomorrow. Tomorrow. Let's see how that transpires. It's an evolving conversation. He knows that. We know that.
did we all get the letter from him? Did you?
Did you? We'll forward it to you.
Roundabout way.
Okay.
Oh, okay. I thought he'd sent it to the whole committee. Okay.
I just want to say for my part, I mean, I think to underscore what Senator Brock said, there's nothing new in that letter.
Yeah.
There's nothing like that we entirely missed. I think we were always aware that the section on how much affordable or middle income housing is required could be tightened up.
And
And there are the same advocates that were in here are working on proposing something for finance or appropriation, since they'll get it as well. But I would just say what I reminded Tom of, which for me, I think was such a aha moment from what was presented to us by JFO, that I wrote an op-ed about it for our local papers in Chittenden County, is the most unspoken reason we're having this property tax crisis is because all of the increases in home values are what's fueling that 10% grand list growth that we see. So they said we have huge grand list growth, just no new housing. You know, that is exactly what our constituents are crying out about. So, you know, to me, it's a pretty obvious discussion for finance to have, that unless we incentivize and cultivate authentic grand list growth, it will all come from existing homes that are, you know, in some contexts being overvalued because of a severe shortage.
and it's really pushing people hard on their tax rates as a result. I would also say that without the but-for test, we addressed that. I mean, our auditor has a problem with the but-for test, and it's a problem without the but-for test. We can't win. We were trying to be far more direct with this chip bill, and the public good is the public good. I think that we can have a discussion of what the public good is.
But I also hope Brett has been invited to show the charts that demonstrate that you can't prove a but-for test in advance. I hate that we ever tried to do that because it's disingenuous. But we can look back at TIFs across the board and see 7%
Added value.
grantless growth versus 1% grantless growth. So I don't know how much more we could prove the but-for test in retrospect.
I don't think we can, but I think we can do it. Maybe you can, all you need to do is look at our most recent sort of shiny example of St. Albans and look at the grantless growth there. And so that is going on in finance. But we have 3 decision points to make in this committee. Do we want an amendment on the labor bill? If so, what do we want to include in it? We have 3 options at the moment that we've discussed enough to include in an amendment. One is whether or not we give the assistant AGs the right to organize, whether we raise the bar for decertification, and whether we whether we require certified payroll. It's just been a requirement in some places for over 90 years. So, so those are the 3 decision points I think we have, and I would, and we have choices of include an amendment, not include an amendment, continue discussion. Because we'll be discussing other labor things as we go through the rest of the session. This is not the end. And I'm reminded by the pro tem that we are in just the beginning of a biennium. So, but on the other hand, I would really love us to move on some of them because I actually feel strongly about them and would support them. So I would love committee thoughts on those 3 pieces and what we want to do moving forward.
If I'm not mistaken, I think we have 2 labor bills. So the first 2 you talked about would go on one, and then the classification or the other information is separate. I've lost track of
Oh, so you're the technical corrections bill. We
What's
have
the
only
number?
1 labor bill at the moment in play. Other,
Did all 3 of these go?
we have a draft. No, we have nothing else that made crossover. So what we have in play for crossover is the technical corrections bill, which Tom did a great job in approach yesterday. Thank you, Thomas.
What's the number of that?
That's 117.
117. So that we have that as a vehicle, and we also have the vehicle of the labor bill itself, which is
S-125.
125. So our numbers, just for everybody, our economic development bill is 122, our labor bill is 125, and our housing bill is 127. So,
You threw a new number in there now.
and so,
Housing 122.
No,
no, housing 127. And we have paper copies of all of them if you want. They're in the bin.
did we vote out 122?
Yeah,
Yes.
yeah, I wouldn't have a number.
So we're talking about an amendment to S-122.
No, we're talking about an amendment to S 125.
Okay.
And so the other drafts that we had did not make crossover. So this is our vehicle, is S 125. And we will continue the discussion and we will get things from the House that may be appropriate to add to.
Well, and this is the bill they were originally in. And they were removed
Correct.
because we haven't had enough time with them.
Well, and because people weren't comfortable voting on it. So assistant AGs, where are people landing on that?
I've got great reluctance. I just don't know that we've talked enough about it, and considered the implications. I'm concerned about the confusing arrangement we have, the amount of change that we would have to make to ensure that there was appropriate separation. Still concerned about a potential conflict of interest. This need to do what I think is a major reorganization of how we provide and at least how we house the legal services to ensure that we have the appropriate separation. I want to hear more before making a decision on it.
Just to make it crystal clear in my mind, there are people with full financial clearance who are part of the state employees. Where are they?
So
Okay.
we don't have an VSEA member here. And I don't know if David has the answer to that or somebody.
What was the question?
Do people with full financial clearance and access in the state, are they part of it?
I guess, what do you mean by cold financial figure?
I don't know, can you name other instances where someone might have a conflict of interest because state government is very complex, but they are part of a bargaining unit and just separated from any,
I would think there would
Bargaining
be
fee.
other examples of that.
Well, there may be other examples of that, but what I'm concerned about is the legal conflict of interest in terms of representation. And whether or not there are cross issues that will arise, if an assistant AG has both labor, issue litigation potential as opposed to others. And are we potentially creating conflicts of interest based on the participation of that person in a bargaining unit as opposed to be completely separate from the union on the one hand, and then having the ability then to freely represent whether it be the department or the state that may be compromised if that person is a member of a bargaining unit and may touch issues that relate to that bargaining unit.
So I felt more comfortable with Sarah's testimony yesterday that they don't have an exact number but that you're right. It touches probably 20 to 30 of their lawyers, and that they would be,
Yeah.
but they would be
Touches
excluded from this.
Or 30 today, and I'm thinking about the issue that develops tomorrow.
Well, I think their jurisdiction would probably, sorry. I think their jurisdictions, those are lawyers whose jurisdictions, I don't think it would change necessarily those identified lawyers, but that was a more realistic.
There is a degree of discomfort. And the second thing, I don't think I've heard enough about, we talked about whether or not we have models in other states, and we found in very few states that had representation of the type that we're talking about. But what we didn't talk about, and we haven't done any research on, is the states that have looked at this and have decided not to do it, and why. Have they discovered reasons similar to the kinds of discomforts that I and others had, and that the AG resolved?
Okay.
And we haven't looked at that. We've looked solely internally and not more. So that's another issue.
Okay. And there are several states that have done it, and that would be more work to figure out who explored it and who did, and then made a different choice. But I will remind us again, it just gives us the right to organize. It doesn't necessarily organize it for them.
Yeah.
So it's up to them in many ways. If we give them this opportunity, they're going to have to figure out how to do it.
Yeah, again, if we need to do a selection later and we pass Prop 3, what are the implications of that? And we may not be able to make the kind of correction that may be necessary given the conflict of interest issue.
Thomas.
So I hear you. I'll just restate two things that I said yesterday as to why I still do support this. Is I do think this just gives them the right to organize, and also as for the conflicts of interest, I see this from some of the brightest individuals in the state, and I feel like lawyers can compartmentalize and they can discern on those roles and be able to work out those kinks. The last piece that I did say is
Arguments on either side as to why they should or should not do that in each
what lawyers
individual
do.
case. I'm looking forward
I think they
to the litigation.
they'll have their debate, then they'll come to a conclusion. But and then the last piece I didn't say yesterday is just that org chart. That tells me that there's some opportunity for refinement and better working conditions where they can have clarity of responsibilities and negotiate for job security. I think it is problematic that there are attorney generals, the assistant attorney generals working in certain departments with questionable funding, that the reporting structure is squishy. That I think that's an argument to allow them to organize in order to negotiate more consistent, reliable terms. And so I'm still supportive of it.
Thanks. David, what do you
Yeah,
think?
so I understand the variety of implications that this could have on the assistant attorney generals. But I do feel that those complications can be worked out in rulemaking. So I support the concept of unionizing.
And you do as well.
I do, and I think we'd be like, we can't come up with a good metaphor right now, but like we're green lighting something that's gonna take over a year.
Or what?
And I just think the assistant attorney generals, to Senator Chitnit's point, they've probably thought a lot about how to have a voice. And I think this is the most appropriate way, because it would be very difficult for them to come to the legislature directly and ask for these details to be sorted out, or to ask for their human services colleagues to get better pay. I mean, it's like, I can't see another way for them to come together. This is like what unions are for. So I think they've done their homework on other paths, and they're just
The issue
are
is
not.
whether we've done our homework, and on issues of why other states that have looked at this have not done it, we have not looked at all. And there's no reason for us to do this today without having done that. We certainly have the time to finish this out in a complete way, either later in this session or in the next session. But when we do things like this, they're often irreversible, and that's where we make mistakes. I don't think we've done our homework here completely.
I'm just ready to give this homework to the House.
Yeah, I was gonna say, this,
I don't trust that.
We have, I mean,
Frankly.
in the history of complicated union, they have been multi-year conversations, that we have not set something in motion that we could not touch again. You know,
Well, we've got what we do, we pass it to whether it be the labor board or somebody else to do this, as opposed to us having our fingerprint on it, and that I'm not comfortable with.
so,
I don't think we've done the work thoroughly to know where we're going to wind up,
so,
and I don't think we thoroughly discussed and examined all the issues that we should.
so in deference to the vice chair, I'm gonna suggest we continue this conversation. I think there are four of us who are ready to land it, but I honor my vice chair here, and I think that, well, let's continue this. However, that being said, I would really like your help identifying and working with the union to get the witnesses we need from the states, both pro and con, and continue this conversation, because I'd love to, if we can, get something to the House by the end of this session. Is that fair?
That's fair.
Okay. Second, we are going to pivot now to our housing bill, because we have 3 minutes, but I don't think that's time for certified payroll or DCERT. But those are the other two conversations. So if we have some additional time today, we're going to have that. And if not, we'll do it tomorrow.
Well, I'm for DCERT.
Yeah, okay,
I put a
let's have-
suggestion
take
on
3
the
minutes.
table, and that is 40%. I don't want to make it so easy that or so easy to do a decertification that we run into and exacerbate the kinds of problems that the labor advocates have talked about, of creating situations in which there's a decertification election every 6 months. At the same time, I want to be able to have members have sufficient voice to be able to have a large number of members be able to petition for DCERT. It still is a majority vote regardless for the end result. So it's getting down somewhere in the middle that I think may solve that impasse.
So I think the union has heard you on that, and I think there may be a compromise that we can discuss. And let's have that conversation and bring it back to committee for us to discuss. We've just, Aisha's had to go to a meeting briefly at the pavilion. So, is that okay with people?
Sure.
Yeah, I think I understand there may be a compromise in the works. So let's do that. And let's actually, so we have DCERT and we also have certified payroll. And so we'll have that continued conversation. We'll see you about 9:30.
yeah, I just need to get my ID to get into the pavilion, and I'm a yes on.
Yeah, no, I know. We're clear. Okay, I am going to let us pivot to housing, because we also have some amendments to consider for our housing bill. So we're going to whiplash ourselves from labor. Well, we need labor to build housing. So we're going to pivot to housing, and we're going to welcome Corey Parent, our first witness. We're going to address the first issue is how to improve people's credit score by enabling their timely rent payments to be included and considered in their credit struggles.
For the record, Corey Parent, I am here not on behalf of any client myself, because Senator Rom Hansdale last week made a comment that I had talked to her about this in the past, and
You have.
feedback might be helpful to the committee. So I'll just explain. My family and I started trying to figure out how to afford to stay in the legislature, started buying apartment buildings. To see if we could subsidize income.
I remember the House of Landlords. I recall when I did the rental
yeah.
registry.
I was like, well, I need something that doesn't take a ton of time that makes okay money. Well, I found out it doesn't always make great money. But just like the legislature. And so Senator Rom Hinsdale and I've talked a lot, and this idea came up about landlords being able to basically comment on the creditworthiness of other tenants through some program, and told I was very effective at what I've learned through the process of 8 years of being a landlord is it's pretty stacked against you from when you're reviewing a tenant. You do get to look at their credit score if you pay for it or charge them for it. We pay for it. I have found that references aren't always the best because the current landlord always gives them a good reference. So check
They
last
do?
2 and 3. Oh yeah.
Always?
Well, because the 6 and I've done 3 evictions in my 8 years, and I haven't had one come in less than $20,000 between lost rents, legal fees, and the damage to a property. So you have to be extremely selective. And I'll be open book with you guys, a colleague. When you're buying a property, you hope to make $300 to $500 a month per unit. So if you're buying a 4-unit building that's $2,000 a month, you lose an eviction, you lose your whole year. Let alone you got to do a roof or a furnace, especially if you're financing it and you're just getting going. Those are decent returns actually, but you can come into that pretty easily. So while I followed your discussion last week, I think my thoughts will align fairly well with Senator Brock's, but I also see the benefits if you can't have the negative piece there, because what I would do in this situation, my frame of thought, is I'd have the question: does your current landlord, do they participate in this program? So then when I go to that landlord, I'd ask the question: has this person had a successful completion in this program? And if they say no, you immediately know they don't have great credit, even though they couldn't afford it. So I'm like, okay, there's a red flag that I would glob onto right now. There is no comment on there. And then I think it would be a way to reward good tenants for timeliness of payment, or when you're kind of in that eviction period, to get them to pay, because there really is no penalty for them for not paying, because it doesn't show up on the thing. There's no reward either, but right now it's, the car payment, the medical bill show up on a credit report. How quickly they pay a landlord, or if they pay the landlord, doesn't ever show up. So, my thought process, again, we're small. We just finished a project that brought us to 16 total apartments. So we're not.
Congratulations.
Thank you. I bought Jim Jeffords' grandfather's place up in Enosburg and redid it over the last 9 months. It was a beautiful building. But that I think anything that would allow landlords at least to start the process to have that conversation with tenants, to help the young ones too, because I've got tenants who want to buy housing, but either had less than great credit before, and they've been great payers over the years. There's no way I can help them in that process either.
No, credit score really would be a big help.
Yeah, and I don't think, in anything that you guys do, don't limit a landlord's ability to access credit scores. I know some states are, and some places are talking about that, but it is so costly when you make a mistake on a tenant. It's about a 6-month process. So if you take the average rent in Vermont, you're losing 6 months rent plus your 2 months of renovation and re-rent out. You're looking at about 8 months of lost rent plus $3,000 minimum legal fees and court fees and all that. Like the cost is so high on making this mistake. I can't tell you the number of references when I call a reference and people are like, oh, I just got out of renting that extra unit because the risk of an eviction is so high. So I think anything that we can do to make it a little bit easier to get that information on folks, I think, and again, this is part of that. At least the folks who do the right thing would have that extra, would help them kind of get to the front of the line. I think on applying for an apartment, I think it would be helpful. I do think in time, it would be nice, as Senator Brock was reporting to be able to comment on the negative pieces too. But I also, during my time in legislature, found it was sometimes you get your foot in the door on something and you can keep pushing in time for it and look at a program, how successful it is. And
this is a pilot.
yeah,
So
exactly.
I think that I'd really love to be able to move on the pilot with the positive. And I think, to go to your point, I think there's time as it comes back to us to look at a more fulsome report
Yeah.
that could include the negative as well, because I think from the treasurer's office, there are some issues of at this point in a pilot, including both.
Well, I gotta tell you, I have a very strong disagreement. I would not support this unless the credit report that is provided is an honest credit report of whatever the case may be of the credit. And that known in advance by the individual who participated in the program. If you have a program that only reports the good stuff and doesn't report the bad stuff, I think it works.
Well, it only includes people who have voluntarily.
That's correct. People who
That
have
if an
voluntarily
opt-in.
agreed to do it, to opt in, and it's to that point forward. It doesn't look backward about their credit before they have opted in. But once they've opted in,
Right.
if their
All-
credit is
all-
awful, it
So-
needs to be reported on a regular basis by the landlord just as well as it reports the good, because without that, it's worthless.
Well,
To that,
my point of
we
the
will
argument
get feedback from the treasurer's office on that, but.
here, my thought is that if they get into the program and then the discussion I heard last week is then the person gets kicked out of the program because they're not making the payments. That still gives a question on an application that maybe banks and other institutions look at differently, but from a landlord perspective, I would ask the question, why'd you get kicked out of the program? And then when I was talking to the reference, why'd they get kicked out of the program? The comment would be, well, they didn't successfully complete it. Well, then I know they had bad credit. So to your point of it's only for the positive, you're clearly going to find out if they're good or bad either way. It just won't be as transparent.
Yeah, it won't be as transparent, and as a landlord, you may be more thorough than many landlords are. Many landlords, when they see a credit report and the credit report is not negative, they assume it's okay and don't go to that next step.
Yeah, no, I
think if we're gonna do something, particularly when the state.
most have learned to be thorough because it's
gotta be
so
thorough and
expensive
complete.
on the state.
Well, we're gonna have Becky in the chair in a second. I just, do you want to
Oh,
respond?
no, I think the treasurer will be speaking.
Oh, Michael's here. Okay, great. Corey, anything else? I think this is very helpful in anything to reduce risk for landlords in this. This is a,
Yeah, because honestly, the risk drive the rent increase of like, you just lost $20,000 on a unit
but this is a win-win. This is a win for landlords at which
if
is,
done right. Yeah.
you've made a great point, and it's a win for renters.
Yep.
Those credit scores need it. Great.
Yeah,
Thank you so much. That was
Thank
very
you.
helpful. And Michael Piche, Mr. Treasurer, welcome.
Hi, Allison. How are you, Senator?
Oh, yes, putting you in focus is a good idea. Hi, welcome.
Yeah, nice to see everybody. And I know Becky Wasserman is there as well.
She
So
is
thank you
in the
for
corner.
having both of us. I think the committee's probably familiar with the rationale for doing a pilot program on rent reporting. But if there's any details that you want on that, please let me know. Certainly the idea is to pilot a concept where the biggest payment that most people are making who are renting gets reported to their credit rating agencies, and people are getting the benefit of that and their on-time rental payment. There's similar pilots that we've looked at across the country, particularly one in Colorado that has, I think, an effective design where it's voluntary, where the tenant and the landlord opt into the program. By creating the program by itself, there is some benefit, of course, to both parties. There's benefit to the tenant that their on-time rental payment will be recorded to the bureau or the three bureaus, and their credit score will either strengthen, or in some cases they didn't have a credit score, they were lacking a credit score, and they will have established one. And both instances, it's a great thing for their future and financial security. There's also an incentive for the landlord. There's a benefit for the landlord in terms of on-time rental payment for somebody that's in this program. There's an incentive for the tenant to make their payment and to make it on time. Now, I think one thing to mention outside of the concept of the pilot is that there are ways for a landlord to report report rental payments, both in terms of the positive and the negative to the credit bureau agencies. One of the reasons we were talking about a pilot is because the research that we were looking at shows that oftentimes landlords will take advantage of their ability to report negative credit, but universally don't also report the positive credit. So creating a pilot program that focuses on that positive rental payment history will allow us to see how an individual's credit score does change during the pilot period and whether there is an interest in furthering the pilot to something that's more permanent. So I think that's the important point to underscore relative to the debate that's happening in the committee is if somebody leaves the pilot program, the landlord is free to file their negative rental history with the credit bureau agencies independently. It just wouldn't be done through the pilot program. And, scenarios that we came across in our research, they were quite prevalent during the pandemic, but they could certainly happen at any time. Oftentimes a tenant and a landlord might be in a dispute over the property. It might be a safety issue, might be a health issue, might be something that the landlord promised that hasn't been delivered on, and the tenant is withholding their rent. So there are not rental payments happening on time. But there is more to the story than simply the individual not filing their rent timely. So in that scenario, in a pilot that we're constructing, that person, would be removed from the pilot, and the legal outcome of their dispute with the landlord would play out outside of the pilot. So I think there are other reasons just to underline and highlight than simply someone being delinquent on their rent for why they may not be making timely monthly rental payments. So that would be the idea around why the pilot is structured the way that it is. And again, happy to take any questions. And also happy if I left anything else out that you think we should underline.
Becky, why don't you come join us, and then we can have a dialogue about it. I heard you say, Mike, that a landlord has the ability, if we construct this in a more positive light, that once a renter pulls out of the program or is taken out of it by virtue of their non-payment, that the landlord can then follow up with the credit bureau and report the negative in non-payment.
Yeah, I think absent a pilot.
Is that easy? Is that relatively easy? Do we know if that's easy for the landlord, if that exists now, or if we'd have to include that in the bill?
Yeah, so absent a pilot, to your question, Chair, there are ways for landlords to report negative and positive rental history to the credit rating agencies. The agencies themselves have been trying to make it easier. There are sort of direct automatic programs that they're developing both for tenants and for landlords. There's some services for landlords that landlords can enroll in that helps them report both positive and negative credit reporting to the bureaus. Certainly hiring a collections firm would do that as well in terms of collection processes. So I think there's a variety of ways that both simple and then more traditional, and that a landlord can, independent from this pilot, report the negative and positive payments. Some of them are pretty new, like the ones that are directly to the credit bureau agencies, I think just came online in the last year or two. So there might be a lack of awareness or just a lack of uptake. And I think that's one of the ideas around the pilot, is trying to sort of
it'll shine a light on it. That's
yeah.
Right. Becky, you want to comment on this?
Yeah, so
How we sort of thread the needle with Randy's concern?
sure. Becky Wasserman, Office of the State Treasurer. So I would just add a couple things to what the treasurer said, that the point that landlords can already do this right now. And I think this pilot is just highlighting that this is available to landlords. So right now, if a tenant was not paying their rent on time, a landlord could go through that process of reporting those late payments. And then in terms
just on that, without cost to the landlord?
I mean, it depends on how you would do it. As the treasurer mentioned, there are services that, provide this. And I think the idea of this pilot is that we would be partnering with one of those vendors. The cost seemed to range about, $1 to $10 per unit. It's in the research we found. So so that this is currently possible. And I guess I would say in terms of the research we did on other pilots, for example, the Colorado pilot, if a tenant who opted into the program was not making timely payments, they were unenrolled from the program and they were not allowed to re-enroll. So I think we would similarly design a pilot that did not keep someone in the program that was not, participating in the way that the program is meant to be operated. So I think the idea is that if a tenant is opting in, we have a baseline assumption that they want to benefit from the program of building a credit history. And the landlord is also choosing to opt in. So it's not requiring any landlords to participate in the program.
Right, so it's opt-in on both the renter and the landlords. David?
Thank you. If a participant eventually opts out of the program or is kicked out of the program, do they have to divulge that they were ever a participant in the program in the future?
I don't think, I'd have to check with Colorado how they dealt with that. I guess I would say that if they did get unenrolled from the program for not making late payments, a landlord would then have the ability to report those late payments. So
Like say we're moving from apartment A to apartment B. Apartment B, landlord wants to know if they were a participant. They were in apartment A, but they didn't comply. Does the renter have to tell the landlord of apartment B that they were ever a participant? Kind of negating the whole negative history aspect to this.
I think the negative history that they would be in the program for such a short time before being unenrolled that I don't know the negative. I think in Colorado you were unenrolled after 3 months if you didn't make timely payments. So,
right. Would anybody ever know a year later that they were ever a participant?
I don't know the answer to how other pilots.
No, I'm talking about online.
Oh, it hasn't been designed, so that's certainly something we could, look into how it's done. I would like to see how other pilots have dealt with that issue.
Randy?
As far as landlords are concerned, you want people to be able, whether they be landlords or otherwise, to be able to go to a credit bureau and get results of the credit history of that potential tenant. And this could be from rentals that we provide, or it could be from other things in the person's credit history, because using credit bureaus for this is quite common among landlords. How do you think our program, once people know how it ran, would be received as a valid source of information by landlords if it was known that we only reported the good things and we didn't report any bad things? Would that really have a deleterious effect on the belief in the integrity of our program?
So if I can take that, Senator, if you think about your point about you want the credit report to be accurate, I think the whole reason the pilot is being established is because our point is it's not accurate. You have the vast majority of tenants paying on time, paying a significant portion of their salary for what is probably their largest commitment that they've made as a consumer. And that's not being reflected on their credit history. So it's underreporting their credit. They're more credit worthy than the credit report is giving them credit for. So we want in the pilot to understand how much would one's credit move if that positive rental payment is being made. Now, again, that's the basis for the pilot, is to get a sense of the benefit for an individual so we can then weigh the pros and cons of expanding it out. It's not for the purpose of making the reporting to the Bureau more or less accurate. I would argue that you could say it's not accurate currently because we're not capturing this big payment that's occurring regularly. But I think the underlying point still is that there is the ability for a landlord to report outside of the pilot the history of their tenant. So we're not excluding information from somebody's credit report. We're just not providing that mechanism through the pilot.
Well, I just asked the question, having been a landlord, thank God, no longer, for 15 or 16 units. I would ask myself, once I got rid of a bad tenant, what incentive would I have to report bad credit? I want to move on with my business and not do that. That's the first point I make. The second question that I would have about reporting is, if the purpose is, among other things, to determine whether or not good credit will make a difference, would having good and bad credit for that group of tenants, A, prove the same thing, and B, prove does it hurt anymore when the tenant is a bad tenant? In other words, you've got a release by people who participate in the program that from this day forward, I'm going to report your rental, and I don't have to be selective. I'm going to report the truth. And in my mind, a program that is in pilot or otherwise should be a program that reports the truth, that doesn't shade it. It doesn't produce misleading information by only reporting the good and not the bad. That's my concern.
Again, I just want to point out, that a tenant could withhold rent for reasons that are not for being a bad tenant. It could be a dispute with the landlord over a whole variety of issues. So I think the better way of dealing with that in a pilot is simply to have them removed from the pilot program than getting into the details of, why rent was or was not made on time. So, whether somebody was in the program and had to leave the program, I think that's fair game for people to know about. I mean, I don't think there's anything the intent is not to be secretive about those kind of results. But certainly it's not always clear cut what is happening between that relationship between the tenant and the landlord. And simply unenrolling the program, I think, is a better option.
Any credit part of a credit report. In other words, a person who is reported under the Fair Credit Reporting Act in a credit report, particular individual making that report or company making that report, person has the right to contest the report and put their own information in the report to rebut what's there. And that appears for everything. It's no different than anything else. If there's a dispute regarding payments or payments due or payments not made, person has that right now under federal law. Why would we change? Why would we do something different?
No, certainly not changing state or federal law. Those rights are always there. The pilot, again, is not designed to temper with that. It's simply to try to understand the impact of positive rent reporting. The scenario I laid out where there's the dispute with the landlord and the tenant, it's not about non-payment in that situation. It's potentially the tenant's not getting what has been promised by the landlord, and you could argue. So there's just, there are legal issues with the lease and with the landlord-tenant relationship that could come up, and we think it's better to have those dealt with through the normal means and have them be excluded from the pilot program when they come up, whether it's non-payment because the tenant has affirmatively decided to stop paying their rent or because there's a dispute with the landlord for some reason.
Just to move this forward, we've lost two members for the moment, but perhaps we could add language, and we don't sadly have our legislative counsel with us, but perhaps we could add language about those who are removed from the program and just have a very simple way for landlords to follow up with that somehow. Because I think there's a lot of support for this idea, and certainly a lot of support for renters building their credit scores. And the vast majority of renters do pay their rent on time. And there are legitimate reasons for what a landlord and a tenant may have discussions about withholding rent. Certainly if there's no heat in the water or a variety of things that one expects, that would be a discussion. So I think perhaps elaborating, because I'd really love to move us forward on this. We just have, when we have two more witnesses.
Well, let me just add one thing. Is what we're trying to do is provide evidence of credit that isn't currently being reported. And particularly if it's positive credit, it's something that is beneficial to the tenant. And for that,
Right.
I'm 100% support it.
And
But
to
as
the
a-
landlord.
As a practical matter, though, what happens is when a credit check is done, the credit check will come back in very abbreviated form. And if there's a dispute, it will mark that there's a dispute regarding a bad credit. But I do not think you should be in the business of selectively reporting results that are misleading and would be misleading to the consumer. And the consumer in this case is the landlord who's receiving it.
I don't think
think that's right.
I don't think there's anything misleading in this.
So
And
it's
it's,
misleading. If you
it's,
only report the good, you don't report the bad. That's
no, you
misleading.
report people who opt into this program,
Yeah.
who pay their rent on time. That is not misleading. That is supportive of people who want to see this opportunity for what it is, pay their rent on time, and would like to improve their credit score. I don't think there's anything misleading about
But
that. I
if
think
they
this,
don't pay their rent on time and you making a credit report of that, is that not misleading?
I think so. I think they would then not be in the program and there would be an ability for a landlord to follow up on that. I think one of our obligations in this committee is to enable economic development for all Vermonters. And if Vermonters are being good citizens, paying their rent on time, they deserve to have their
But if a
economic
person
opportunity
enrolls in the
improved.
program and then doesn't pay their rent on time, is it not misleading to ignore that?
No, because of it's not, because this is a pilot program with that creates an opportunity for people. That is,
Well, I think if you did a survey of 100 landlords and asked them if it is or is not misleading, 99 of them would say it's misleading.
I don't think so. And anyway, for us to move forward on this, I'm very supportive of helping create improving people's credit scores by doing something that they're already doing, which is paying their rent on time. And the vast majority of renters do this. And we'll have a subset of people who opt into this program. If we could construct language that might simply enable a landlord to follow up or whatever, I don't know, we need to thread the needle of people who then are asked to unenroll. So I think it's the people, I think what your concern is those who are asked to unenroll from the program.
I'm
And
concerned
have
with
that.
those who simply don't pay their rent on time, just like
Yeah, but
any
they may
other
not
lender.
have, they may not have enrolled in the pilot.
If they've enrolled in the program, if they've enrolled
They have
in
to
the
have
pilot,
opted in.
then the information that gets reported should be truthful, accurate, and complete information.
I think it will be. And if they are unenrolled,
And if they
there
don't
should
pay
be,
their rent, that will be reported the same as if they do pay their rent.
let's see what we can work on as for how we deal with those who are unenrolled. Because I think that is your concern. These are people who've opted into a program. If they are unenrolled, what is the relatively simple way of the landlord could follow up and find out and have that reported as well.
So if language is included that provides that in the program design, there is a process for unenrolling tenants who don't have timely payments. And provide options for landlords in that scenario.
I think that's fair. This is a pilot. This is not, we're going to learn a lot in the next 2 years about how this works, what could make it work better, and what makes it work more fully for all landlords and tenants.
Right, and I guess the only thing I would say to that is that if we add that language in and someone is unenrolled, I don't know that we can require a landlord to follow up on it. I think it's just telling landlords of their options.
And landlords already have this option. I understand. So landlords have this ability now. Yeah, maybe not as easily.
Expensive, yeah.
So that's part of this, is how to make it less.
And there's no incentive to do it once a tenant
Right.
is gone.
Yeah.
It's kind of like immunity too. You need a critical mass of people to do it to make it worthwhile. Because if you're the only one reporting it, but other people aren't in the market, you're not getting the information that's useful to the market. So the biggest part of the pilot is getting enough people.
Into it.
You need enough landlords to want to do it and get them excited about it to make it worthwhile long term.
And I think that's the job of this group, to market it and to get it to enroll, because we have some already enrolled in it. Great. I'd just like to ask in the few minutes we have left, Alex, just from right there, why don't you add any thoughts you have on this?
Thanks, Madam Chair. Alex Carroll, Commissioner of the Department of Housing and Community Development. I mean, I think Corey probably summed up our concerns at best. It's just that, just making sure it's accurate information, but we need to make sure that there's incentive for people to participate so that there's substantive data.
It will not be a worthy pilot if we don't do that marketing to landlords and to tenants. It's going to take requirement both. Agreed. Thank you. So let's work on that language. Randy and Becky, maybe we can work on this with Cam and let us shift gears then. Thank you. Is that okay with everybody? Okay, great. Okay, Laura, I think you are we're going to pivot to the next concern that we had included that is part of actually an amendment proposed by Keisha, and that is, come join us. It's good to have you. I think this is your first time here this year.
Yes.
Welcome.
Committee, thank you.
So we should probably introduce, you may or may not know everybody.
I do.
Oh, okay. So you know, and you've met David. Great, perfect. And why don't you introduce yourself and respond, if you would, to section 2 of the amendment.
Yes, thank you. I am Laura Tuchman. I'm a State Historic Preservation Officer. It's been my honor to have that position for 12 years now. And as this is my first time in here and the division talking about housing, I wanted to give you a little background of what we actually do as it pertains to this amendment. The Division for Historic Preservation routinely provides technical assistance and works with those who receive public funding to move projects forward. We encourage projects that will help the state to meet its housing goals. We are guided by rules and regulations of a project-specific funding task, and that's really important. Where the money comes from guides how we evaluate it. The Division for Historic Preservation guides applicants to undertake responsible preservation practices, acknowledging the need to alter and add historic buildings to ensure successful continued use. As we review plans, we may inquire if changes can be made to preserve significant historic features. Our inquiries are never intended to stop a project, reduce the number of housing units, limit changes to historic buildings so that they essentially become museums. I speak personally, we have enough museums.
You do, we need more housing. So we need fewer museums. We love our museums, but we need more housing. That's right.
So the division works to find ways for buildings to be used. We do not deny projects because that is an authority we do not actually have. We find ways to get to yes. If there's a reasonable explanation why elements of a project plan cannot be changed, we seek a balance of the losses and changes on what can be preserved and restored. So for example, if historic hallways of an apartment building should stay because they're character defining features, we ask, is there an option where an addition can be added to the building that allows for additional square footage needed for housing units? If existing windows need to be more energy efficient, can the decorative and curved windows be restored and the rest of the windows replaced? If they cannot be restored, can we find a quality replacement? In some cases, we actually reduce project costs with our ideas. The Secretary of Interior's rehabilitation standards have guidance that is recommending and not recommending. It is not yes or no. And this provides our needed flexibility. The standards are used by every preservation state office in the country. The implementation of these standards and good preservation ethics are recommended by the Division for Historic Preservation because our mission is to consult. No building is the same as the one next to it. They have changed over time, even if they were erected exactly the same. The needs of the tenant are different. The person who owns it may have added on to it, so we need to address each project individually. For Act 250, we provide just recommendations to the district commissions to consider. For federally funded projects under Section 106, the federal agency provides the determinations for which we concur. For community development block grant CDBG projects located in historic districts, the review exemption includes interior alterations. So if it's in a historic district, we do not look at the interiors unless there's some National Register recognized character defining feature that has already been called out in the National Register nomination. For the 20% rehabilitation investment tax credit projects, we work with the applicants who are voluntarily seeking this funding to implement the Secretary of Interior's rehabilitation standards. But the final determinations for those projects belong with the Park Service. And I have to admit, sometimes we don't agree with them, but they are running the program. For downtown and village center tax credits related to the 25% historic facade work, we restrict our reviews to the exterior of a building. Since 2012, 136 Vermont projects have received rehabilitation investment tax credits, with more than 50 million in qualified rehabilitation expenditures, bringing historic properties back into service. The total cost of these projects reached almost $300 million. This is very significant for Vermont. We rank third in the number of rehabilitation tax credit projects from 2023 in New England. We're tied with Maine. And their projects costs are double what ours are. Significantly, these projects have provided 1,062 housing units, both new and rehabilitated. Last year, 4 projects completed in 3 Vermont communities were granted over $1 million in these rehabilitation tax credits, leveraging more than $5.4 million in qualified employment, contractors, purchase of materials. The completed 2024 projects, 3 involved rehabilitation of housing, resulting in 18 new units. The rehabilitation tax credits, together with the low-income housing tax credits, are the greatest source of funding for housing projects in Vermont. It is a voluntary program. If you do not want to participate, if you want to alter your building in a particular ways that we don't recommend or the Park Service doesn't recommend, you do not have to take these tax credits. Historic buildings can be adapted successfully for new or updated use, of continuing use through repair, alterations, additions, while preserving those features that convey historical, cultural, and architectural significance. It's a consultation, it's a dance, but it works. And we end up with some really great projects in Vermont that people are proud to live in. Historic preservation is not just to safeguard our cultural heritage. It also is to promote vital community identity, support economic development, and foster education and tourism, all while contributing to a more sustainable future, because the greenest building is one that already exists. Vacant and underutilized buildings are not good preservation ethics, nor good for Vermont. The Division for Historic Preservation takes our role in assisting Vermonters to adaptively reuse and rehabilitate buildings very seriously, and we're dedicated to being part of the housing solution.
Thank you, Laura. That's very helpful. Have you had instances where historic preservation choices have reduced the number of units? This concern is, I believe, and Acacia is not here at the moment to discuss where this originally came from. So I can only imagine that it originated from a project where the number of units had to be reduced for some reason. Do you have experience with a historic preservation project in that the requirements of the preservation reduce the number of units that we were able to do?
There are preservation projects that result in the reduction of units, but that is not coming from our office. There's a new building in Windsor, for example, that had a number of stories, a little higher than I was comfortable with, across from a nationally significant church. And I asked, can you reduce it down 1 story and find space elsewhere? And they said no, because it's in a floodplain and we would lose number of units. And so I said, okay.
And then the town
went and reduced the number of units. There's a building on Flat Street in Brattleboro. It was a rehabilitation investment tax credit. They wanted to put an addition on the roof of the building, and the National Park Service said, no, this does not qualify for rehabilitation tax credits if that's what you want to do. We worked with them to find space elsewhere so that they didn't have a full reduction loss of those units. So it's not coming from our office.
No, I appreciate that. And it sounds like you worked very productively, and as you have pointed out quite rightly, that these are, that people enter into
Yes.
these tax credits and access historic preservation money voluntarily. They know the parameters of the programs, they know what they're getting into. And so if it does result in a reduction, they have gone into it eyes wide open.
Exactly, and it's a great benefit for them. I would also add that it's a 5-year program that you're under review. So after 5 years, you can put an addition on, you can add more units elsewhere.
Oh, interesting. Huh. Any questions, anybody?
Yes.
Yeah, Grant?
For the qualify for the various kinds of tax credits that you're talking about, is that solely limited to properties or that are commercial in nature? In other words, a purely residential property, would that qualify as single residence?
A single residence would not. These are income producing. It doesn't
Oh,
have
they're
to be
all have to be
commercial, but
income.
it's gotta
That's
be
what I
income
thought.
producing.
That's what I remember. Okay.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Thomas?
Are you, I thank you for the testimony. I'm looking at the draft language that has been floating before. So are you testifying against that language, or are you just stating that it's not relevant because you don't currently reduce residential units available for your project with your oversight?
It's not really valuable.
Yeah.
You're not testifying against the language, you just don't see it as relevant.
Right.
Okay.
And we also do not monitor project costs. We do take that into account if a building is being proposed for demolition or something like that. We take into account costs, but we're not monitoring the cost of the project. So there's no way I would know if it's costing too much.
To follow up on
Yeah.
that question about what constitutes a commercial project, would a duplex, for example, in which one unit by the owner is rented out to someone out, or who has an ADU in the unit that is rented out, would that constitute a commercial project?
Yes.
How do you separate?
Yes,
Okay.
that qualifies.
So even just one unit?
Income producing.
Okay.
Oh. Oh, attractive. What a program.
Right?
In terms of when the application process for folks who want to participate in one of these programs, where does the application go? Does it go to you, or does it go to the agency that is the principal sponsor? How does that work?
The applicants come to us. So it's the property owner will come to us. We are the conduit to get the application through the portal to the National Park Service.
Okay.
And we have regular consultation with them. We're meeting with them on a regular basis. We have them up here to look at projects
Mhm.
so that they have an understanding of Vermont climate and the buildings that we're talking about.
Mhm.
So we work, I shouldn't say we, Caitlin Corkins, an amazing person at the State Historic Preservation Officer, works with applicants from just the idea all the way through to the ribbon cutting.
And of the applications that come in for assistance like that, what is the kind of success rate that you're seeing?
Almost always. The projects are moving their way all the way through. Right now, we've got probably about 25 applications that are active. They're slowing down a little bit because of the cost of materials, the tariff conversation, and the limited number of contractors that are available.
Mhm.
And many of these projects need a funding stack.
Yeah.
So that's another reason why the way this legislation is written is not going to impact greatly, because there's always going to be multiple investors in a project, and a lot needs to be done to these buildings, because most of the time they're also picking buildings that have been vacant or underutilized, not taken care of for many years. So they have to do something to the exterior. Changing a window is an exterior alteration.
And in terms of the kinds of percentages of benefit of tax credit, is there an average project size and benefit that you see?
They range.
Or a range?
They do range. They can range from just a couple units in a large residential building that was single family that now becomes housing. That could be like $1.5 million, or it could be, Bennington High School is likely to be the most successful rehabilitation investment tax credit project in Vermont.
And that's how many units, and none of those units were affected by the historic preservation.
That's 39 units, and no, they were not.
Right. Keisha, you're just stepping in at the end. We're about to pivot to Ben. But Laura, we need your testimony. If you could send it by email to our committee
Yes.
assistant, that would be great.
Excellent.
Because that was very helpful. Do you have because what we've heard, I think, generally is that this is a voluntary program that generally doesn't impact number of units, and that really, that I think the language that we have that we're looking at isn't relevant to this.
But you don't
program.
oppose it.
I have no feeling one way or another.
Okay.
It's not going to change how we do things.
Okay.
We are regularly working to make sure the number of units stays where they need it to be to make a project viable. If we say you need to reduce the number of units because we won't support this addition or this alteration to the interior of the building, likely they're going to walk away from the project, which means they've walked away from a building. And we don't want that. We want buildings in use.
So you're saying that you never have asked for a, something to be preserved that has cost unit,
No, we do not. We work to find ways to make it happen.
and no one on your team has done that.
We may inquire, like, can you remove this story or can you not do this addition? But our goal is to make sure that these buildings are used.
When would you say, can you not?
We don't have the authority to say not or no. We have to
Uh-huh.
find a way to yes.
But when you just said that your question might be, can you not add this?
Can you pivot and do something else instead to still have those number of units? So if we, like the project that was in Windsor, that was a new building, but in a historic district. It had 5 or 6 stories, I think, and I asked if it could be reduced a story and those units captured elsewhere. And they said no for a number of different reasons. And I said, okay, then we keep the number of stories you presented.
And then
Actually,
that's
was
the town.
the town that reduced the number of stories.
So you don't have a problem if this language were on the books, just to make sure that it's clear for those doing historic projects that they shouldn't be asked to reduce the number of units for internal historic preservation or
Well, that's not going to be coming from our office, but again, I safeguard that it could come from Act 50, it'll come from the town, it could come from the National Park Service if you're doing rehabilitation tax credits.
So if we said that it shouldn't come from a state entity, that we'd only be, like you said, it could come from other places. So this would be the legislature saying that's not in the public interest at this time.
Right, and it's also not in our interest, it's not part of our name.
But we don't have everyone in the room right now who you said might, from the state level, put that requirement in.
Act 250,
Yes,
I can't control that, we just make recommendations.
right,
to them.
but we can. I mean, that's what we're looking at. So you have seen projects where the number of units are reduced or the
I wouldn't-
comfort level.
I
don't
do
think
not
so.
recall any projects through Act 250, no. I will say it's usually the community or the National Park Service that is creating a pivot. The number of.
So we might add municipality. And then we're not talking about the number of stories. Because
No,
we're
the
just
number
talking
of
about
units.
internal.
But usually adding units is adding stories or adding an addition.
We've heard examples of preserving interiors that have historic significance at the expense of the comfort of the tenants or the number of units.
That would most likely be coming from the National Park Service through the Rehabilitation Investment Tax Credits.
I what we keep hearing it generally and most likely. So I'm trying to rule out that it would be coming from an entity within Vermont's borders.
Well, the National Park Service does have, it is reflected here in Vermont. I mean, that you're right, it's a federal way, but.
So they would at least know that that's not, we don't want that to just be it would be nice recommendation.
But we heard at the beginning of Laura's testimony is that most of the historic preservation, everybody wants things to pencil out because everybody wants buildings to be used and old buildings to be used. So the objective seems to be everyone rowing in the same direction to make it
I
possible.
think that's only if you are, I mean, if you're talking about private developers, then yes, they could walk away. They have come in here and enumerated that many times they have let more costs be added and not walked away and passed those on to the ultimate person in the unit. But we also have a lot of affordable housing and nonprofit partners that use state dollars to go do projects that don't pencil out for other developers that will feel obligated to say yes to strongly worded requests, even if they're not required. So I'm not sure I hear anything compelling from you of what the problem would be having this on the books.
I would say that those projects that are using state dollars are also using a bunch of other investments that would trigger the federal national fund.
But you don't have a problem if we said the state could not be asking for this.
I'm concerned that just across the board that it would be never to ask this because our reviews are building dependent. Right? It depends on what the building can withstand and each building is different.
But these are building. I mean, it isn't language that says you never can ask this. It's language that says they are 100% not obligated to follow a request that would reduce the number of units or make it a structurally difficult project if that's requested by a state entity.
So I can think of some examples where, and again, they're National Park Service, not us.
Okay.
We most of the time are making the recommendation to support what the applicant is doing because we've been working with them for years. And we know the goal of what they're trying to do with the project. So one example where they couldn't capture the interior of the building additional units because the very wide hallways had to stay the same. And some of the interior walls that created the spaces had to stay. But then we proposed an addition we put on the building and the National Park Service was fine with that because of where it was located. So they ended up having more units than they originally proposed to us.
Which is great. So that's productive problem solving.
Right.
Yeah, and it sounds like that's really what you engage in because our interests are aligned in many ways. None of us want to reduce. We all want them to pencil out because we all want the project to go forward.
I think pencil out is not the right way to look at it with projects that are paid for by the state. They don't usually walk away from those projects, but those costs add up.
Right.
And that's who we heard from.
So we have 3 other witnesses that I'd love to just hear from because we'll continue this, but Laura, thanks for this. And then
Thank
we'll
you.
go to Ben Doyle and then to Polly and Alex. Alex, you can sing each one.
Hi, everyone. Ben Doyle.
Good to have you, Ben.
Nice to see you.
It's lovely to see you. Do you know everybody?
I believe so. I don't know that we've met. I'm
Hey,
Dave.
Rick.
Nice to meet you.
Welcome to the company.
Yeah, thank you.
And you know everybody.
I think so.
Okay,
We were on
great.
class trip together.
Well,
See you all. Yeah. You were missed.
What bus trip?
No.
go to Northeast.
Oh, that's a good idea.
Yeah, I was like, I don't think I have a
Yeah,
lot. No, I went to the Northeast Kingdom. Yeah,
Yeah.
we drove around
It
and
was-
looked at a bunch of.
There was the Northeast Kingdom of
Yeah, it
it.
was good.
Oh, yeah.
Yes. We're sorry to miss it.
Thanks for inviting me and I'm glad to be here. My comments are really brief because I feel like Laura covered most of it and probably has a lot more expertise on this specific thing than I do, but I have some comments that I'll just read into the record if that's okay.
Great. And we'd actually like you all to send your comments so that we can post.
Perfect.
Great.
Great. Well, as I said, my name's Ben Doyle. I'm the president of the Preservation Trust of Vermont. For those of you unfamiliar with the trust, the mission of the Preservation Trust is to build community through the preservation of Vermont's historic buildings, villages, and downtowns. In short, we help communities save and revitalize the important buildings they love, whether it's a general store, sacred space, or town hall. Last year, we worked on 362 projects in 155 communities. Without question, our 2 most important partners in supporting rural communities in this work are the Division for Historic Preservation and the Vermont Housing and Conservation Board. The division provides accessible expertise and funding to communities seeking to preserve the historic resources that define a sense of place and exemplify Vermont's rich history. The Vermont Housing Conservation Board's three-legged stool approach to community development rightly serves as a national model, combining the creation of affordable housing with land conservation and historic preservation. That's a long way of saying that community development in all of its complexity is a team sport. Each of our organizations plays a role in ensuring that Vermonters have access to safe, affordable housing in downtowns and villages that are vibrant, authentic, and reflect the values of our varied communities. That's why I have a few questions about the amendment under consideration. First, I wonder that the amendment purports to solve a problem that has yet to be quantified. Do we know that affordable housing in historic buildings would be cheaper without the support of historic preservation funding which requires the kind of review the amendment seeks to remove? In a federal historic tax credit project, does the cost of meeting the Secretary of Interior standards typically exceed the funding made possible by doing so? I don't think we know the answer to that. Where's the data? What's the matrix? Are affordable housing projects in our historic downtowns more expensive than new construction in greenfields? Maybe. But are we considering the economic impact of projects like New Avenue in St. Johnsbury, the Putnam Block in Bennington, and the Wilson Block in Springfield, all of which have a positive effect on surrounding businesses and have catalyzed additional private investment? Ask the town managers of these communities. Ask the residents. The second question, I feel, is that whether this amendment is adopted or ignored, the practical effect, I think, would be the same. Projects receiving the benefit of federal historic tax credits require the approval of the National Park Service and will therefore need to meet the Secretary of the Interior standards for historic preservation, regardless of what the Vermont State Historic Preservation Officer says. And similarly, any project containing federal funding, whether from agencies like USDA Rural Development, the Department of Housing and Urban Development, Northern Borders Regional Commission, will by federal law still require a 106 review and potentially mitigation of adverse effects to historic resources. So to be honest, I'm not sure I see the value in adopting the amendment, but if nothing else, I really think that it has an opportunity to foster a conversation about how we reaffirm the spirit of collaboration that makes Vermont the kind of place where historic downtowns like White River Junction, St. Albans, St. Johnsbury, Richford, Brattleboro, and Bennington are treasured for their authenticity, vitality, and diversity.
You did say South Burlington.
Yeah. Yes, absolutely. Yes.
All 10.
We're friends, I think, Bill.
Absolutely.
This amendment. And I mean, you and I have had a conversation about specific projects.
Yes.
That even you at Preservation Trust would not side with more local historic preservation groups, not the state, not a statewide entity like you, because they really were pitting historic preservation against affordable housing and taking, I mean, the most public example in the last couple of years is the church in downtown Burlington, the non-historic church in downtown Burlington. You're shaking your head.
It is historic based on its age and its significance, but that's not dealing with the fact that it's a church, and that's why it is moving to the next phase.
Okay, because my understanding is there was an effort to run the clock to extend the timeline so that it would end up on the historic registry and it would hit that amount of time. And that you had a staff person working under you at the state on his own hours who was helping to sue the city of Burlington to advance the goals of Preservation Burlington. And that person is no longer at the state. Is that right?
He's no longer with the state. That's correct. But he was not working. In fact, he recused himself when Preservation Burlington took on the lawsuit against the city. So he did not participate. We were completely silent on that.
But you have no control over what he's doing on his private hours.
No, but he did pledge to us that he was not participating as part of that.
Okay. Well, that is the kind of thing that I am trying to have a conversation about. That silence around historic preservation. I haven't seen the color of law for historic preservation, but I think we know it has been used as a tool to to keep affordable housing and keep, frankly, more housing from being built in places where people can use aesthetic concerns, and to reduce the number of units. And how are you
Yeah.
dealing with that?
Yeah. Well, I would say, first, like as a non-negotiable to me, people are more important than aesthetics,
Thank you.
right? Like,
Thank you.
I would say
I
that.
wish more people would say that.
No, but I
As a
think,
representation,
I
right?
actually believe that we all, I come to the field of historic preservation really from a community and economic development background because I was attracted to this work because I see the opportunity and the collaboration that exists in this field, right? I mean it when I was talking about the Vermont, and we're going to hear about, we can talk all about this, but like the Vermont Housing and Conservation Board, the brilliance of that is that it's using historic preservation as a tool for the creation of additional affordable housing that reinvigorates our downtowns that are really the greatest asset economically that we have in this state.
Mhm.
There are always going to be disagreements about individual projects in the project that you referred to. Frankly, I felt like there were more valuable uses of my organization's time, just to be really frank, and that there were other people that were interested in that. Have at it, you do you. I'm gonna actually go to Winooski and work on St. Stephen's
Mhm.
because I feel like that's a really significant building where there's an opportunity to build affordable housing around that site and have a wonderful thing happen. And so, I think, are there disagreements between organizations, between individuals? Sure. But I really, we're friends, right? I can say this.
We're
like,
working on a
I
project together.
worry that there's a false dichotomy between either or.
Yeah.
Mhm.
And I think
I think-
sometimes we do get polarized on things like that, but I do think through conversations like this one,
Yeah,
we can come to a shared understanding of like, we are pulling in the same direction.
right.
What use is a historic building if there aren't people living in it or using it? Right?
Yes,
So anyway,
yes.
I think we're probably, all of us are closer than we might even
Right.
imagine.
By the way, my stepdad just moved here and joined the architects
Yes.
board, and his specialty is historic preservation in downtown Los Angeles. But I don't think we have this conversation enough. I do think historic preservation interests have been complicit in pushing people further to the periphery in less desirable housing, in less efficient housing. I was just in Venice, Italy, and I feel like if they can figure out how to give people warm, efficient, comfortable places to live, who are we not to do that in our historic buildings?
If I could just say one last thing.
I'm sure that,
I do agree with the idea that there have been times when, lots of different zoning regulations have been used to work with, right? Having said that, I can speak authentically from my personal experience that my work with the division and with BHCB and in Vermont, it's this real team spirit that cares about people in our communities and is, I think, working really hard. It's not to say that we don't need to have conversations about it, because I think we do.
And Preservation Burlington just upset that balance, I feel. And we can have them in, but, having a legitimized nonprofit that, has enough power in Burlington to have real decisions made about a downtown, essentially call a 2-story non-historic building a Notre Dame of downtown Burlington, and try to stop 200 or more units of housing being developed. It reflects on your work. It reflects on a conversation that maybe has gotten a little too out of whack, and we can't let that happen. I mean, we can't let these things go unspoken when we're in a housing crisis.
Thank you. On that, we're going to pivot to Polly.
Thank you for your time.
Thank you, Ben. And would you please submit your testimony?
Absolutely.
So apologies to Ellen, who I believe is, I know you're, I was just thinking Josh isn't here yet, or it's messed up.
And Josh is, okay, and the Zoom is waiting.
And the Zoom is waiting. So we're gonna take Alex, we're gonna,
You can vote.
is it okay? Can you, we might be okay. So Polly, let's go. I know. It's not, but what, I'm just concerned about our time, because we're already 5 minutes over and we have Alex wait. So let's take 10 more minutes on this and then we're gonna move to the next piece. But thank you, Polly, for being here. Welcome. Good to have you.
Thank you. For the record, my name is Polly Major. I'm the Policy Director for the Vermont Housing and Conservation Board. And Madam Chair, if I could speak both on the historic preservation portion of this amendment and the accessibility portion, would that be possible?
Absolutely.
All right. So we've heard a lot of debate on the historic preservation language. I can submit my testimony for the record, but maybe I can just address some of the concerns that we've heard and
Yes.
continue the conversation.
Absolutely.
So you've certainly heard from our executive director, Gus Seelig, on his frustration about when National Park Service requirements lead to the reduction in units. We saw this at French Block, right here in Montpelier. We do understand that the department, when they are working on implementing the requirements of the historic tax credits, are implementing federal requirements. And those are the ones that are most restrictive, and those are the ones that result in changes to interior of homes, which we often are concerned about the tenants that are going to live in those spaces, or the reduction of units. So what we are looking for is to continue the partnership with the department and helping them be as strong advocates as possible as they're working with the Park Service in the interpretation of these rules to mitigate the changes we have to make to these downtown buildings. So that is something that I think is outside of the scope of the Vermont legislature because it's federal rules. We recognize that Laura has been a really effective partner in negotiating with the Park Service, and we're asking that the department continue to do that to, where possible, push for flexibility in the interpretation of these federal rules so that we get as much value out of the historic tax credits as possible. We heard Laura talk about the 136 projects around the state that have been supported with that tax credit in recent years. That is a significant source of funding that's coming to Vermont for affordable housing. So we want to continue to use it. And certainly every project is different, but developers are looking at what is going to be the cost of compliance for the historic tax credit and what are we able to draw down from the tax credit. And in most cases, the cost of compliance is going to be less than the value they're getting from the tax credit. So that tax credit is helping to subsidize affordable housing. The language in front of you is going to impact projects that only have state dollars in them, but not federal dollars. And when VHCB is working on historic buildings, we don't want to leave any source of leverage on the table. So we're always looking to use those federal dollars. So I think we appreciate the asking the language to be reasonable in interpretation and to be strong advocates of the Park Service. I don't think we're going to see it have an impact on the classic historic preservation developments that we're working to support around the state. I will say in terms of cost that the state share is not covering the full cost of the redevelopment of historic buildings. And so when we're seeing the cost of the project go up, that cost is being covered by the historic tax credit that is being leveraged. So the unit is going to be more expensive. The cost to the state is not going to happen because it's really the cost of federal source that is going up. And that's as we have a chart that shows kind of the funding stack for projects. And you think about the state share, on top of that is the low-income housing tax credit. On top of that is the historic tax credit. So where historic tax credit compliance is raising the cost of the building, the historic tax credit is there helping cover the cost. So that is one reason why we see it is really economically worth it to continue to invest in these downtown historic buildings. And there's always advocacy that needs to be done at the federal level for a reasonable interpretation of the National Park Service requirements and also a reasonable timeline for when they're making decisions on what are the historic elements of the building and how do those need to be preserved. We have seen at the federal level, I should say I covered housing for Senator Leahy before this job, so worked on this issue, both the federal side and the state side. We have seen movement in recent years of on this, on section, the interpretation of section 106 to add more flexibility there to respond to the need to make historic buildings more climate smart, and also to have an acknowledgement that the interior of homes is private space. So there is some positive movement, and we still need a lot more advocacy there. So in terms of this language, I would say I really appreciate what you're trying to do here to get at a reasonable standard. I understand the federal constraints, so it's really working where we have a state lever. And really want to continue to work collaboratively, as Ben Boyle noted, with the state, department as they implement these roles. Maybe I'll pause.
Any questions? Okay.
You know, having, I don't know, it's been about 15 years now in and out of this building. And some of the projects that have been named, the funding stacks really came together when there were more dollars flowing into the state. So like St. John's Very been languishing a long time, Putnam Block. I actually was paying close attention to Putnam Block because the opportunity zone tax credit was coming online in the first Trump administration at that time. It strikes me that there are times that we are letting historic buildings languish because nobody has the money to renovate them to the level that we did. Has VHCB said no to projects in the past, but they could only say yes because of really precious new dollars that were infused that would be spread thin in these historic projects?
Let me try to parse through that. And I can't, I guess I'm not able, I can do more research. I can get back to you on that. I can't speak to decisions the board made in the past, especially before I was.
Right. I know it's
What
like
I'll
if you have like
say-
a gun in the room and he remembers every house.
And we have a board meeting today, which is why Gus isn't here.
Yeah.
What I will say is that state dollars leverage those federal dollars. With fewer state dollars, either before the housing revenue bond or the time we're moving into now, we will be able to bring less dollars to bring these historic buildings back online. So we are seeing the value of state dollars and taking on these historic projects. And we'll do less of that work with less funding, and we will leave federal dollars on the table with less funding.
Right, which we don't want to do.
We don't want to do. And then we bring additional dollars to the state by taking on these historic buildings. So both they have an immense return on investment for community development and in terms of bringing dollars to come on.
Is there anything in this language that you and well, we have three of you still here that we would work on to accomplish what we just talked about?
This language is only going to affect a narrow selection of buildings that I haven't seen any projects I think that this would impact. So it is more a signal to the department.
I think that's what is intended.
Yes.
Yes. I mean, our last two housing bills, I think one could argue signaled very strongly to the state that we are paying attention, that we would like to see units of housing prioritized in these conversations.
And I will say the Department of Housing and Community Development is an ally here. Laura and her team are strong advocates for reasonable standards for the Park Service, and they are put in the position of needing to interpret the Park Service guidelines, which are often challenging.
Can municipalities make a determination about the interior of a historic building that would reduce the number of units?
It depends on their local regulations.
Yes, because some have the design review boards. I don't know if the design review boards are able to go internally. That's a conversation we should have with the LCT.
I mean, even I think it would be great to get to the accessibility piece because, you know, I have seen ADA, you know, having a fight with the historic preservation and, in our bigger communities than the state.
If I may, it's not a fight, it's a conversation. And every time we are approached to do ADA or fire safety, we meet right there at the buildings and we solve the problem.
Okay, I mean, the conversation can take a long time.
Absolutely, but that's what conversation is.
Often conversations do. Okay, so if there was language, we would entertain if you had any proposal on this language too. But let's pivot at the moment. Yeah, I don't think so either. But let's pivot to, you wanted to touch base on the accessibility, which is section
4 of the amendment, I believe.
section 4 of the amendment, which is a limitation to residential rental agreements.
Sorry,
No,
no,
I
not
thought it was
section
minimum
4.
design standards.
Section 4 Disability Housing Grants Pilot Program is what I was looking at. I don't know if there's.
Oh,
been a
that's sorry,
new-
section 5.
Okay, there's been a new version.
It just wasn't misnumbered in the draft. So it's section 5, disability housing, right?
All right, so I just wanted to speak a little bit to the existing program we have in the state that does work on disability housing modifications. So the Vermont Center of Independent Living administers the Home Access Program, which is funded by Dale and VHCB. So my ask to this committee is that we work to build off of the existing program in the state. There is more need out there than this program can meet, and there might be more types of accessibility modifications that this program can meet. So I think there is room to build it. It'll take additional investment. Just to give you some background of the program, the Home Access Program provides funds for bathroom, ramp, and entrance accessibility modifications to households below 80% median income, where there's a member of the household that has a physical disability. VCIL also helps peers assemble the funds from other sources to help pay for the project. So that's getting at that leverage piece that is in the legislation. And it awards grants to both homeowners and renters to allow individuals to continue living independently. So it's a very valuable program since 2020, and the program has been going on long since before then. This program has helped over 430 households around the state. And they've received these accessibility grants. VHCB is the primary source of funding for this program. We provide $445,000 per year to VCIL to run this program. With the one-time funding we received since 2020, we've been able to almost double support for the program. We've added an extra $400,000 per year so that they can expand to reach that
Up to
program.
800, over
Up to
800,
800.
right?
However, if our funding is reduced this year, we go back to base funding, we are not going to be able to continue that higher level of support, and VCIL's program will shrink back down. So there's demonstrated ability from VCIL to work at a higher level, reach more households, and there's certainly a need for additional funding to flow into this program.
So I'm just curious, the 430 households that you helped, were it helped with the 800,000, not the 400?
Yeah. The Department of Aging and Independent Living since 2010 has funded this program through VHCB with $100,000 per year. So it's subcontracted through a lot to Dale. AHS over a number of different housing programs has subcontracted with VHCB because we have the administrative infrastructure to fund capital projects. So when they have money for capital projects, they often ask us to administer those funds. This is one of those cases. We've done that for housing. We've done that for healthcare as well.
Right. So what's your ask with this language if you already do this?
So
Money, if you would like, if we wanted to give you more money to actually do what you're doing, you'd like that.
So I
I
have
assume.
some draft language, but yes, what I would recommend is that the sum of $1 million be appropriated to VHCB to support the procuring and modifying residential dwelling units.
To continue what you're doing now.
So could I just say, I mean, Cameron and I were trying to follow the money that exists, and I think we can do better with the language. I think I was aiming to accomplish a couple things. One would be supporting that modification to, access an existing home.
Mhm.
I think we're going to have wheel padded and, talk about great local modular and manufactured options, that would be additions to homes, so that you're creating a new unit that might have some additional privacy. So that was, I don't know, I don't even know if we put it in the language, but we were trying to get at Dale being able to help further resource the revolving loan fund that helps create
Credit union.
accessible units. So there were two goals in having this conversation. The modifications, which obviously are huge bang for your buck in helping people stay or, you know,
Right.
access existing units. And, you know, a conversation about a depleted revolving loan fund where we could find out interest rates so people could add an accessible unit to them.
So I think at this point, I'll stop and say for the record that my husband, RJ Adler, works for WheelPad. So I just wanted to put that out there. And I saw in this language that you're trying to get at a broader scope than what the VCAIL does. I think what we could do is we could find other partners like Opportunities Credit Union that has the Independence Fund and grant to them and fund them to do an expanded scope of work.
Okay.
So that would be more frankly, in VHCD's wheelhouse than in Dale's wheelhouse. I will say Opportunities Credit Union has full WheelPad, but they're not able to fund that type of project. So there's more work that needs to be done there. as
Yeah.
well. And
even if, you know, like RJ, I've been going to visit WheelPad in Wyndham County. I recommend everyone does. Before RJ worked there, he just happens to do great things and find great existing effort. But I hope we can hear from WheelPad, because there's nothing like what they're doing. If we are really want to support manufactured housing, it's such a win-win-win.
I would recommend we have that conversation when we continue our conversation on, but I would think for this immediate need, I'd love to have you work with Cam on language that we could then look at for an amendment by the end of this week, right?
Sure. I mean,
Yeah, that would be-
I just want to make sure people understand it's as Polly's saying, I would like for us to keep an eye on a revolving loan fund that helps create modular additions to homes. And like, I want that even if there were more organizations that will have, I'm hoping they, you know, pop up to communicate with us. But that is my concern, is that we have so often said someone with particular types of disabilities cannot live at home and receive certain funds because they don't have enough privacy and their parents will have too much control in their life. And I think we need to start to crack that nut on, like, there's not enough year-round caregivers to help support someone in a different setting. And we need to figure out how to create privacy and common sense for people with disabilities to be able to live close to support.
I think VHCD can find the partner to administer a program like that.
Okay.
And prior to my work there, has funded WheelPad.
Great. So let's continue this language. We have somebody who's been waiting for 20 minutes to, all the way from the Pew Charitable Trust. We're going to pivot, if we can, from this discussion to back to how to, by right housing, which is, an element in our earlier draft of our housing bill that we are now revisiting. And I believe, Ellen, we'd love to have you, but I think, Alex, you have a time crunch. Maybe I'm wrong. And welcome. Samantha, come on in. We're discussing.
What sections is
This was section in our last draft. It's section 11, I think, in draft 3.1. It's the by right manufactured housing. Section 11. And we asked, there were a number of you who were concerned about this, and we have Alex Horowitz here from the Pew Charitable Trust. We have our fabulous legislative counsel, Aaron Tchaikovsky, and we have Vermont League of Cities and Towns with Samantha and Josh. Josh, why don't you sit there at least for the moment? And because Alex is on Zoom. So I think let's start with Alex, because I think you have the time frame and you're with us from Philadelphia.
Hey, good morning. Nice to be here with you. I'm Director of Housing Policy at the Pew Charitable Trust. I'm in DC.
You're
Yes, and you're right, Pew is headquartered in Philly. but most of our policy work is in DC. So this is our largest office. And it's nice to be with you this morning. We do work on housing affordability, availability, and that does include manufactured housing.
Great. I'm going to just have us quickly introduce ourselves. So do you have a notion of where around the state we represent? And then we want to address the proposal in front of us, which is the by right proposal in our bill. Thomas, you want to start quickly?
Tom Chittenden, South Burlington. I represent Chittenden County Southeast.
Keisha Rum Hinsdale, we co-presented at BSG together next to Steve.
And great to have you because of Keisha's introduction. Allison Clarkson, Windsor District.
Randy Brock, Franklin County in Northern Grand Isle, the northwest quarter of the state.
Good morning, Dave Weeks, Rutland County.
So you have a whole range of Vermont represented here. We'd like to begin with you just because of your time, right?
Okay, great. Thank you so much. Appreciate it. And nice to be with you. Thanks for having me this morning. I do have a slide deck I can share with you, but let me say by way of background before getting started that we have seen laws very similar to this one pass in Maine and Rhode Island and Maryland last year. And other states have enacted laws like this previously to make it easier to use factory-built housing, although this issue has taken on new urgency as construction costs for site-built housing have risen sharply and shortages for certain trades like carpentry, electrical, plumbing, roofing have become severe, especially in rural areas. So we are seeing increased use of an interest in manufactured housing, especially in states with significant rural populations. Montana is addressing the same issue right now and trying to up their use of manufactured housing to deal with construction shortages, which also may candidly get worse going forward. And as the cost of materials has risen, there's more interest in factory-built housing because it's much more efficient and produces less waste because it's built on an assembly line rather than built on site.
So
And
Alex, let me interrupt you right there because
Please.
I think it would be helpful for members of our committee to appreciate what you're talking about when you talk about manufactured housing. You're not just talking about mobile homes. You're talking about pieces of houses manufactured off-site that are assembled on-site. Is that correct?
So manufactured housing is specifically housing regulated by the HUD building code for a type of factory-built housing with a federal building code. That building code was first written in 1976. It's what we call mobile homes or homes built before 1976. The quality got much better in 1994 because there was an update to the building code, and generally speaking, homes built after 1994 are of much higher quality than homes built before 1994 in factories. But with recent upgrades, homes built in the last few years are of absolutely comparable quality to site-built housing. There are three main types of factory-built housing. One is manufactured. That is where you get a real cost advantage. That is housing regulated by the HUD code. Second is modular. That is housing built off-site, and it's prefab. So
What's that called?
Modular.
Modular. I'm sorry, I just didn't hear the beginning of it.
Yeah. And I'm sorry, I'm at a housing supply conference today in DC. People around the country are in. So a little bit of background noise. I'll try to get a quiet area. And the third is panelized. Panelized is when the components of the home are built off-site and they're assembled off-site. So those are the three main kinds of factory-built housing. When we talk about cost advantages, it's only manufactured housing that has significant cost advantages over site-built. Modular and panelized still come in pretty similar to site-built in terms of cost per square foot. Normally, also for starter homes, if we go back to the 1980s, about 40% of homes were starter homes, meaning they're under 1,400 square feet and they're affordable to truly middle-income households to buy. Today, we're down to about 9% of new housing is starter homes. So homes under 1,400 square feet that are affordable to truly middle-income households to buy. Manufactured housing is overwhelmingly housing that would count as starter homes because the cost per square foot goes up as the size of the home goes down. And that's a really strong relationship. Kitchens and bathrooms have a higher cost per square foot than the rest of the home. But every home is a kitchen. You can't get away from it. So if you've got a 5,000 square foot home, you have one kitchen. If you have a 900 square foot home, you have one kitchen. And because the cost of the kitchen per square foot is much higher than the cost of the rest of the home, and also every home's gonna have a bathroom and a shower, and the cost per square foot is higher there too, normally starter homes have a much higher cost per square foot than big homes. The average now is over $200 per square foot for starter homes, and for a bigger home, and this does include low-cost areas, you're more around $130, $140 per square foot. With manufactured housing, you can get down to $80, $90 per square foot because of the assembly line and because these are prefab models that they're, it is a fairly cookie cutter design, but there are a lot of economies of scale from using assembly lines and from having the federal building code. It means that you can sell the same homes in Vermont and New Hampshire and Maine and Massachusetts. And that's not true for site built housing because you have different building codes in each state.
Great.
Okay, so with that background,
Would you be kind enough, Alex, to send your slide deck to us so that we have it on record?
It's already.
It's already up. Thank you. We didn't have it earlier this morning, so I wanted to make sure we have. Great.
Okay, excellent. Great. So I will share slides, but I'll move through them pretty fast this morning. And let's see. I think I'm screen sharing though, right?
Yes. Great. And just keep your microphone where it was so that we can hear you.
Okay. Excellent. Great.
Thanks.
So we're talking about expanding manufactured housing, similar to what Maine, Rhode Island, and Maryland did last year, and allowing this to be used in site where site built can be built as well. So for background, US, we've got half of renters spending more than 30% of income on rent, a quarter spending more than 50% of income on rent. These are all-time highs for housing costs. Housing prices are also at an all-time high, with the average house in the US costing more than 5 years of income. That's about $420,000. Historically, houses cost about 3 years of income. So prices and rents are highest they've ever been in real terms. Part of what's going on is that household size has reached an all-time low of 2.50, but in Vermont, it's 2.33. So that is a very unusually low average housing size. It explains why there's so much demand for smaller homes. But also, look, when people live in smaller households, you need more homes. If 5 people live in a household, you need 20 homes for 100 people. If 2 people live in a household, you need 50 homes for 100 people. 63% of households in the US have 1 or 2 people. Vermont actually has the highest share of any state in the US of households with 1 or 2 people. It's 71.3%. Part of what's attractive about manufactured homes is they are smaller and they cost less. They're good starter homes. And so if people don't need a big house, 4,000 square feet, manufactured housing is an excellent solution, especially for a state like Vermont, which has an unusually large share of households with 1 or 2 people. The housing shortage in the US of 4 to 7 million homes is why housing is so expensive. Vermont has had a 72% drop in inventory, which is the main reason why prices have spiked in the state. Yes, please.
I think you've heard me say this before, but I also try to call those smaller homes ender homes because I think, when you look at Vermont's 1 to 2 person households, it's a lot of seniors who'd like something far more manageable, some cottage style of living. Mm-hmm. And so I don't know if, we're alone with Montana in that concern, like that these are ender homes that we need in a lot of cases.
Yeah, I mean, that's a great point. The reason why a lot of retirees do not downsize is because there aren't smaller homes available near them.
Right, exactly.
It took my parents about 6 years to downsize, even though they were looking for a long time, because there was just nothing smaller available. And so they stayed in a large house that was bigger than what they wanted or needed, but they couldn't find a suitable smaller place, and that took years.
Yeah, and that churn at the moment in Vermont is really what we're facing, is the lack of the ability for that churn.
Right. And so look, Vermont has had a huge drop off in inventory, bigger than most states. And so the median home cost, as you can see, has risen in the last 5 years sharply. And in the Burlington area, the median home cost has also risen, and this is a fast increase in housing prices in 5 years. It makes sense that people can't afford housing. And look, a drop in interest rates is not going to solve this problem. It's a shortage. If there aren't enough homes, there aren't enough homes. And yes, I mean, if interest rates came down, it would help construction a bit, but the shortage existed before the rise in interest rates. And there's just not a federal solution here. The solutions are going to have to come from states. So with this shortage, we're looking at rents in Burlington and see how much they increased over this 5-year time period, 43%. Vermont has had, I think, the sharpest increase in homelessness of any state in the US, with the homelessness count tripling since 2019. And we see that homelessness tracks home prices and rents very, very closely. So places where rents are rising fast, homelessness is rising fast. Places where rents are stable, we see homelessness dropping. There are places in the US where homelessness has dropped during the time that it has tripled in Vermont. Those are places that have added enough housing to keep rent growth under control. Minneapolis has seen homelessness drop. Minneapolis hasn't had rents go up in 8 years because they're building housing at about triple the rate of the rest of Minnesota because they've enacted such compelling zoning reform that's made it easy to build. So how does this tie into manufactured homes? So we're talking about a high quality, lower cost option for housing. This is regulated at the federal level. And this is a way to build smaller housing viably where the projects pencil. Starter homes or ender homes usually do not pencil because the cost per square foot is high. And another factor driving this is lot sizes. Large lot sizes mean that land costs are going to be high for the home, whether people want a lot of land or they don't, whether they can afford a lot of land or they can't, whether they want to spend Saturday mowing the lawn or not. And large lot sizes end up making manufactured housing much harder to use because the land costs end up being a big part of the purchase price. So the advantage of a lower cost home is muted if people have to spend a lot on land. So I do want to flag that if large lot size minimums are still in place, manufactured housing's benefits are meaningfully muted, because the land ends up taking up a bigger portion of the purchase price. And you can see how this plays out. If somebody is buying a manufactured home, a low-cost manufactured home that's $57,000, if the land cost is $50,000, their monthly payment's $785 a month. But if they have to spend $250,000 on land, their monthly payment is going to be $2,252 a month. So land costs are a big piece of the puzzle here also.
Yeah.
But the cost advantage of manufactured housing is quite big over site-built. These numbers are from the Joint Center for Housing Studies at Harvard, a study we did with them, and looking at how for single section homes, so small homes tend to be 800 to 1,200 square feet, the cost advantage is biggest for manufactured housing because site-built often is just uneconomical since the cost per square foot is so high for a small home. And I should flag that for energy efficiency purposes, manufactured housing can have a tighter envelope than site-built housing because it's factory precision built. And so if you add solar to the new models of manufactured homes that came out in 2024 and 2025, those are net zero ready. So you can knock out your electric bill with solar on these homes because they're small and they're more energy efficient than their site-built counterparts. And so we are seeing a trend of states allowing these everywhere, like Maine, Maryland, and Rhode Island last year. If you look at this 1,400 square foot house, nice enough, got a little front porch, got a pitched roof. You could probably say it's factory built, but I mean, this doesn't look that different than site built. 1,400 square foot house, 3-bed, 2-bath. The home itself is under $130,000. And this is available in Vermont. I checked this model. So a site-built house this size probably wouldn't be built at all, but the home itself would be a little more than double this price because site-built construction is just more expensive on a per square foot basis. So we are seeing developers in Maryland, Virginia, and Texas in particular use factory-built housing to build new subdivisions because it's faster and it costs less, and that can open up homeownership to middle-income households who are otherwise priced out today. And there are mortgages available from Fannie, Freddie, FHA, and VA, Veterans Affairs, for homes like these. But it is important that people can access mortgages. If they can only access personal property loans, different story. Mortgages cost less, they have lower interest rates, they have stronger consumer protections. But Vermont is actually doing pretty well on this. Look at Vermont versus surrounding states. A higher share of people are using mortgages than personal property loans to buy manufactured homes. That's a very positive development because mortgages simply cost less. They have longer terms, lower payments, and better consumer protections if somebody runs into trouble. So wanted to share all of this and answer questions as well. And I think you have my email address, but it is here.
Great. Alex, thank you. That was terrific and very helpful to tee us into this conversation again, because we just begun the discussion. Any questions of Alex before we add to the, can you stay with us in our conversation with our Vermont League of Cities and Towns?
Sure, glad to.
Thank you so much for taking the time from your conference. We really appreciate it.
I just want to say I haven't seen that lot size figure before. I think that's extremely helpful to Vermont's conversation. I have shared a chart that I will share again that Vermont has the largest average lot size in the country. And I think that's really contributing to this. And I'd love to hear what the LCT has to say about lot size.
So any questions for Alex before we move to Josh and Sam? Okay, great. Let's continue this discussion. Josh and Sam, take it away.
Excellent. As we load our presentation here and get connected, just to introduce ourselves. We haven't been in this committee yet this year, but know many of you. Josh Hanford, Director of Intergovernmental Relations with the Vermont League of Cities and Towns.
And I'm Samantha Sheehan, the Municipal Policy and Advocacy Specialist for the Vermont League of Cities and Towns.
Thank you.
And we do have a presentation to share.
For the sake of time, I'd like to get this in really soon, but Ellen's worked on a final draft of the housing bill that would go to natural resources. And people mentioned wanting to sign on. I don't know how much time I have to give you to look at it.
Can we circulate it on the floor?
Well, that's
for us to read.
I sent it to you earlier.
Yeah, okay.
I sent it like that.
I know, I was just gonna say, put it in, but then I was like, oh, people actually asked to be on it. Heidi, can I forward it to you to print? Thank you.
You need it for one copy.
Oh, I thought we'll look at it. I think while we're on the floor.
So five copies. Thank you.
wherever that is. Open your web browser.
Okay, Sam, are we all set? They have the link.
Yeah, and they're on. Thank you.
Oh, Josh, you're on.
Yeah, I'm trying to find our presentation now.
It's the State House blogger.
It's not there.
Go to just open it.
Thank you. Thank you, Thomas.
Was it no.
Was in the email. How did you?
Standing.
Oh, no, I'm asking. Oh, sorry. Standing is a good idea. David led by example.
What you just said.
What you just, I don't know. It's weird.
Weird. Okay, so now go to slide, go further into the thread. It has the one with attachment. So that's the one I want. Let's just make sure.
Oh,
Okay. Can you? Okay.
It's kind of hush.
It kind of looks like it.
Okay, right.
There you go.
Yeah.
All right.
Can we just wait for the
screen?
Yes.
So just close these out so you can drive. And then go to slideshow. Play from the beginning. There we go.
Sorry about that.
Perfect.
We're done with that one.
Okay.
Okay.
Josh.
Okay. So in regards to this section of the bill that talks about manufactured housing, VLCT's view is that we don't prescribe housing types. Communities should build the type of homes and density that they need and envision and allow. We feel that sort of the provision in your bill further clarifies what's already there. It said manufactured prefab modular homes are allowed in across communities. So we don't have an objection to this strengthening language. As we
In this bill.
in this bill.
Okay, in the language that we had, okay.
Yeah, absolutely. In your committee bill.
The by right manufactured housing section. No, it just.
Yes. Our bigger concerns are that policies that expand Act 250 exemption and support the creation of public infrastructure, support manufactured home types, as you just heard in the presentation. If you need 3 acres to put in on-site water and sewer, it sort of negates the cost efficiency of a manufactured home. Yet manufactured homes is a significant part of our housing stock. It's in fact how many low and moderate income Vermonters become homeowners, that they have adequate property in their family available, and they're able to place a manufactured home, do the site work, bring utilities, bring water and sewer. It's 6% of the housing stock. In some counties, it's much higher than that. And on owned land, manufactured homes, traditional mobile homes do appreciate and provide wealth that can be passed on to generations. We also wanted to mention that the bylaw preemptions that are in the H omnibus and the housing omnibus housing bill, we support those. They sort of limit the appeals that could be brought to slow down housing
Are we
after
looking
people.
at that after crossover?
Yeah, so we just wanted to make sure to mention our support for that with you. We also wanted to sort of address the existing, past 2 years of very aggressive statewide and municipal zoning preemption, pro-housing preemption, and sort of speak to how municipalities are trying to meet those goals and are largely in a position to enact and meet these new goals. We did a survey, sort of tried to understand what was getting in the way possibly of some communities meeting these new requirements. And as you'd expect, it's funding, it's planning, it's other priorities. Often they may not have received the RPC grant that would help them bring their zoning and bylaws up to standards, but there is pretty substantial progress being made. Let's see else here. We also wanted to talk about infrastructure. We think the lack of municipal infrastructure is really what's holding back the housing development, especially at a price Vermonters can afford, need to be able to afford. And that has to deal with the lack thereof and the expense and the challenges municipalities are facing trying to bring municipal infrastructure. We did a survey this fall. This is only 35 municipalities who reported projects that they have either underway or are planning, and that challenges they're having. Many have received state funding, or some have received state funding, some have received federal funding. The average cost is $14 million. This data doesn't even include Burlington. These are anticipated projects from 2025 to 2030
Per project is 14 million
per community.
per community, okay.
Yeah, the average price per project that is underway to either create or extend water and sewer is 14 million total project cost.
I have a provision in the natural resources housing bill Because Shelburne just went through this, and I really commend Matt Lawless and our team in Shelburne for trying to underscore what I think was our intent, that if you are along water and sewer already, that you be able to take advantage of our the existing provisions. We have something written down, but I'd love VLCT's help, because we have places that have water and sewer infrastructure where there have been months-long expensive arguments about what it means to be close enough to hook up to that water and sewer, but not have water and sewer, and it's
Right.
driving me nuts.
Right,
Yeah.
and in that scenario, I understand the case and know where it went, and that is true. It is also true that communities that have water and sewer capacity don't have the capacity to connect adjacent to the lines that already exist. Just because it's nearby, they may need to upgrade a pump station,
Right.
extend the pipes, and that is millions of dollars that they don't have the resources unless they raise property taxes to upgrade.
Or
So
water
it's-
rates, but
Or
yeah.
it's, so it's and that is also a need to realize the benefits of the density, land use regulations that we've worked on the last few
This
years.
is Woodstock right now,
Yeah,
because we had a
Yeah.
private water system that didn't.
And
invest.
Montpelier, I think. It was.
Yeah, I
Yeah,
guess
I think
our-
the other place is the same thing. Here we have the infrastructure everybody wants, but it's.
Right.
It's not, it's under-resourced and is incapable of actually adding more at the moment.
Right.
Until we do significant
right.
upgrades.
I mean, Stowe is maybe an outlier of a community because they have a very dispersed, but they have lots of infrastructure, water and sewer, the way they've developed, and often those extensions have been paid for by big developments and businesses. And, there were some people projected that, look at the places that have water and sewer. Look how much housing could be added here. When you have to talk to the public works director, the engineer that manages the system, it's just a fallacy. They would have to do so much upgrades and additions that capacity is not the same as the ability to connect people. And they had to say no to a couple significant housing developments because the water lines were nearby, it would be tens of millions of dollars in upgrade to their system, even though they had capacity.
So we are on the floor.
Yeah.
It's 8 minutes,
So we're going to be
Yeah,
quick
let's-
here, but the point is, this is almost $400 million of ongoing need. We've only secured $150 million. There's a $220 million gap now to meet the demand that already exists before we add new to it.
Have you presented to finance?
tomorrow.
Okay, good. That's good.
Yes, we need you in finance for a
Let's
bunch of
get back to.
Yeah.
So there is, you have
Oh,
it by email, yeah. So we're gonna zoom through this slide, which is just to say in summary, in CHIP, in considering changes to the language proposed now, or working in defense of the program as it moves through the legislature, please consider ways to be inclusive of redevelopment projects. So not talking about building on a parking lot or raw land, but taking buildings that are vacant and out of use and under proposal for redevelopment. We'd like to see a tax increment formula that supports those projects and also being inclusive of rural and mid-sized communities, tier 2,
We can include it
historic,
here too.
yeah, and as well as historic settlement areas. Including towns like Fairleigh is an outstanding example of a municipality that is doing everything in its power to encourage development and housing. And they're really stuck, frozen out of many of the state's sort of current schemes for assisting municipalities in doing that work. Because they would need to look at something like a community septic rather than the creation of a sewer system in order to achieve the density that Fairleigh wants.
Right. Our hope
Yeah.
is with CHIP that the septic would be as
Eligible.
eligible as any.
Excellent. That's our position.
I'm looking at Alex because I think that for redevelopment and flood impact, there is a way to make the property tax freeze work better that we instituted last year. I feel like that intersection is what's needed for properties that have very low grand list value now and could have exceptional grand list if completely redeveloped. And that's what some told us in their feedback about CHIP. This is nice, but we are trying to redevelop on sites that are blighted, and we could use a property tax free.
We had that discussion in that other chamber, and we support the and or option. Yeah.
And the number we heard was, about 10 years is where you need
Right,
it, and it needs to be state and municipal.
Yeah.
Yeah.
We
So-
want, yeah.
Yeah, let me take over here. So we would like to address, hopefully this is helpful to you. I think you understand these considerations, but we would like to provide you some additional information about tax increment and grand list growth from the municipal perspective that is hopefully useful to this committee.
So this is useful, but this is useful actually at the moment in finance.
Please share this with finance.
So,
Yeah.
and I just would love to finish your work on by right, because what we're considering is an amendment to our housing bill about our by right section, which we removed because it needed further conversation. So that is really what we're focused on at this moment.
But you also said something about H 479.
That's
Yeah.
coming to us from.
That's coming to
Okay.
you, and the point there is that the provision that would allow a legislative body to adopt a preemption, which by rate measures in the preemption statute, to adopt that without a public hearing, by just an action of the legislative body, is complementary to this step that you're taking.
Yeah,
And so we
Is that
support.
moving?
yes,
Yeah,
Okay.
yes,
definitely moving.
Okay. Yep, that is the housing bill.
Yeah.
I need to add another number.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
yeah.
Of course, we have
Yeah.
just-
But that housing bill also has the ability for municipalities to assess a local option tax on short-term rentals.
Yes.
Which we would also support as municipalities to help generate revenue, mitigate the impacts in those communities that so choose to add that.
So we will have you back when we get H 479. We envy them their time during the course of the day to address all these issues near and dear to our hearts. So we will be looking at that fairly soon as it gets to us. We will have you back. I encourage you to book time in finance. with
We're there
this.
tomorrow.
Great, because we need your support on our CHIP proposal, which,
Please either send me a note or
so just,
find me after the floor, because right after the floor, I'm gonna email Ellen.
right, so you're wanting to get this in so that it's into natural resources.
Yes, so if you would like to be a co-sponsor, affirmatively let me know before I submit it around. And
Great. Give us time on the floor to look at it. Okay, we are going,
Thank
we
you,
are
Alex.
sadly